1, 2, 3, 4. Pedagogy a go-go. Pedagogy go-go-go. Hello and welcome to Pedagogy a Go-Go, a podcast about college faculty sharing what happens in their classrooms and why. This is episode 2, Table Shakers, and we are your hosts, Gina Turner and Tom O'Connor. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Gina. Welcome back. We have crossed the freshman hump. We are onto our second episode. They didn't believe we
slump.
They didn't believe we could do it. The fools. They didn't know us.
We're back.
We are back. Goodness help us. And so thank you for being with us today, our valued audience. Gina, I'm going to dive right in.
Do it.
What'd you learn this week?
What did I learn this week? Oh, my goodness. I learned so many things this week.
Really, I only learned one.
Where do I
try to limit
begin?
myself or else it takes up too much space.
I learned that I could actually look kind of cool to my students by showing that I knew not only who a recording artist was, but that they were dropping a new album this week. So that was pretty exciting to me. That's all I got, really. What did you learn this week?
Here's the thing I learned, and I want to frame it carefully. I've had a lot of conversations this week where at different points people talked about something I think we can all agree on, which is that it's really important and we all do our best to treat our students as they are either adults or young or emerging adults based on the age that they are. And it's something that we strive for in the classroom. And I think it's something that is worth being thoughtful about in the classroom, about how we model adulthood for our students and how we then engage them within the classroom as adults. I will say that, there were a few moments when someone said something along the lines of, well, we need to treat them like adults. And I kind of had a thought bubble appear over my head in that in the context in which they were suggesting we treat them like adults, it actually seemed that they were treating them like children, in the sense that, well, it's about darn time someone treated them like adults, and so they missed their 2 weeks of class, they're gone. And I thought, well, if you were chairing a committee of your colleagues and peers, and they showed up late for a meeting or they missed the meeting, you'd probably pick up a phone if they missed it, or you'd ask them after the meeting, hey, everything okay? I know you were rolling in. Was the traffic bad or anything going on at home? Whereas oftentimes in the classroom, if a student shows up late, it's you're tardy, don't forget. 3 times tardy is an absence, and it's this kind of punitive way of addressing the situation, right?
And not trying to get to the bottom of it.
And so, I'm trying to be more conscious of how I frame my thinking of students in such disparate ways of policy, of enforcing policy, of how I talk to them, of asking them about their lives outside of the classroom. So that's been, I think that's been a deeply meaningful interior conversation I've had with myself, and I hope that we find room to talk about it. I kind of as this Pedagogy a Go-Go series goes on, and what that might mean in different teaching situations. Yeah, so that's what I learned.
I think that's great. Seeing them as a whole person, just like we see our colleagues as whole people.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And so ultimately, we can all be peers in the classroom in some way in the journey of learning together. Yeah.
Well, I'm also remembering that I gave you a little bit of extra credit last week, and I'm wondering if you did it.
I did do it, and I think I should remind our viewers what that extra credit was. So last week you spoke about the book club you were in, and the book you were reading, and you hadn't read it in a long time, and so your homework was to ask me to do the same. In other words, to revisit a text that I had not read in many years. And so the text I chose was an essay from Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick's book, Touching Feeling. And the title of the essay for our audience, it's called Paranoid Reading and Reparative Reading, or You're So Paranoid, You Probably Think This Essay Is About You.
Which is a great title.
It is a fabulous title.
And for those of you who are not, not familiar with the reference, because we are old, it's a reference to the Carly Simon song, You're So Vain. And the lyric is, You're so vain, you probably think this song is about you.
Right. And
I feel like we had to give that explanation. Is it Mick Jagger?
Is it James Taylor? We want to know.
She's never revealed.
She has to one lucky auctioner. She auctioned it off for charity. It was like some guy paid $1 million to to answer that question.
I hope that she still lied to him. I hope she still didn't tell him who it actually was.
So, and I should simply say this homework assignment ended up being shared because I photocopied the essay, I shared it with you, and I know you've read it as well.
Yes.
I will first speak to the experience of rereading it, and I should simply say that I loved this essay as a graduate student. I loved it again reading it, although I saw it with a very different set of eyes. For those of you who don't know, Eve Sedgwick was a really important queer theorist in the 90s, kind of coming up with Judith Butler. This is a later essay by her, and it addresses some of the what she calls strong theory, and she kind of she pegs Nietzsche, Freud, and Marx as kind of being the foundation upon which much of our cultural theorizing today is based on. And she sees these quote-unquote strong theories, as she labels them, as paranoid, and identifies some critical traps that we might fall into with them. And so she offers as another option, and the word option, so it's not an answer to them. It's not in place of, but this idea of reparative reading, where reparative it's ameliorative, it's healing. It is also holds out, it is from the word repair, but also holds out this idea of the surprise, and surprise is a good thing, and joy. And so I think it's a little bit more hopeful. It's a later essay in her career, and she is in some ways looking back, much like the the homework exercise, on her earlier theorizing, and seeing the influence of, she says, these kind of paranoid readings. And she's trying to identify a way forward for theorizing. And so that was so I identified ultimately with who I became, which was far more pragmatic, more localized. And I felt kind of like Eve Sedgwick herself, looking back on some of my former writing and work inside and outside of the classroom, and being able to be critical, recognize who I was then and who I want to be now. And that I think changes a little bit of the way I operate in the classroom. So that was that. I'm sorry for waxing on.
No. It's obviously a reading that was really important to you, and you had mentioned it even prior to it becoming, this answer to my extra credit assignment.
And I am a cultural theorist, and I was really sensitive to the fact that she's working in a lot of psychoanalytic ideas built from Freud, and I was curious how someone with a psychology background would encounter this. So please, I'm dying to hear what you thought.
It's interesting to hear you explain how it affects your practice in the classroom, right? That you're trying to be a critic who recognizes that there are multiple perspectives, that historically criticism has been sort of masculine, and that this is a more feminized approach to criticism. I'll tell you, when I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of words. That's a lot of words. That's too many words.
She's very dense.
She's very dense. And then she started talking about Freud, and I was like, oh, here we go. Because, of course, as a psychologist, a modern psychologist, and I'm not a clinician, as I always say to my friends, I'm not that kind of psychologist, right? So I'm not a clinician. I'm not trained in treating people, in having clients and working with them therapeutically. But I am versed in the history of psychology, and Freud is an important historical figure in psychology. Kind of period, maybe, at the end. He certainly was really important for us recognizing the unconscious, and, of course, his students and other people who have gone on to be influenced by him, yada, yada, yada. The psychodynamic practice is still very important, especially in some area, yada, yada, yada. I could go on. But a lot of Freud were like, he was a little wild.
So, as Robin Williams said in Good Will Hunting, did enough cocaine to kill a small horse.
Yeah, there's that too. But what was cool for me is that it was a reminder, again, of what you said, that for me as a psychologist, Freud has certain meanings. And for a literary or cultural critic, Freud is very important for other reasons. And it's important for me to remember that those references are going to be different for different people in different disciplines. Right. Just like for my students, and I'll give a little spoiler for what we are going to be talking about with our guest today, there are going to be references that we might assume they know that they don't know, and vice versa. There are going to be things that they say to us that have very different meanings within different contexts.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of what I took from the reading. The reading itself was, I can now say I have read Eve Sedgwick. So that's something. But it's good for me to be knocked out of my comfort zone and out of my context.
I said to Jeff Armstrong this morning as I was sitting in the CTLT, I was reading it for like the second time for the assignment because I forgot quite how dense it was. And I said, Jeff, it's been a while since I've read something where like it takes me like an hour to get through a paragraph and I have to read it 5 times. But I think you took one of the most important things from it, so I'm so glad you did, which is the idea is that when cultural theorists invoke Freud, I think she's sharing your criticism because modern psychology made a break with Freud. It has historicized him and his importance and moved beyond it. And I think
for the most part.
For the most part, yeah, of course. Like we still have ideas like the unconscious and things like that.
Yeah.
But for cultural theorists, she's I think trying to show the latency of Freud in their thought, the way that Freud has structured in ways they might not be thinking about, and that they too should make that break.
Yeah.
So like it gives us a way to talk, from someone who's in English and
exactly.
And a cultural theorist or your sociology coworkers.
Yeah.
It's a way to talk about it. So thank you.
Yeah.
I love having homework again.
It was a fun journey. So I think we're going to take a little break, and then we will come back and we will introduce our guest. For
Absolutely.
the week, or the month, or whatever it is.
Oh, definitely the week.
If you had just one word to describe yourself as a teacher, what would it be?
So we're already clearly having a good time. Our guest today is Shanita Hubbard, and you've been teaching here at NCC for 3 years. You've taught our sociology classes, you've taught political science classes, and you've taught criminal justice classes for us. So you've been all over the place. I'm fortunate enough to call you a friend and a colleague at our Monroe campus, though I know you've taught at Bethlehem's campus. You've taught online for us. You have a fascinating history, and you are a fascinating individual on so many levels. And I'm going to pull from the bio on your own Facebook page just because...
Facebook? My website.
Your website. I'm sorry, your website. So we were talking about social media, and I think for the purposes of this broadcast, I should be honest that I am the Luddite in the room. I'm the one who no one can find on Google. I get almost all, but basically my wife keeps me plugged into the world. As I was perusing your webpage and learning stuff about you that I feel like I totally should have known, so your master's degree is in criminal justice, but some of the work you've done, you've worked as a therapist for youth on probation. Mm-hmm. You've operated job readiness programs for formerly incarcerated adults. You've directed youth alternative to incarceration programs. You've done grant writing. You're an adjunct professor, and incredibly well published and writing some of the most exciting pieces that I think are out there in the New York Times, now in the Guardian and the HuffPost, and a number of other Pitchfork, and just like the list kind of goes on and on. So welcome to Pedagogy Go Go. Welcome. We're so
Thank
happy
you
to
for
have you.
having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure.
Thank
Definitely.
you.
So we have a couple of questions we like to ask toward the beginning of our time together. And so I'm going to start with the kind of fun question, or maybe hard question, depends. So if you had just one word to describe yourself as a teacher, what would that word be and why?
Oh, that's a good one. Table shaker.
Ooh. So she's of your tribe, Tom.
She is of my tribe.
That would make sense.
I got in a lot of, so in our premiere broadcast, I got in a lot of trouble for banging on the table. So
okay.
I'm literally a table shaker. I'm not going to let that word stand. Can you expand on table shaker?
I recognize that I don't even know if it's absolutely intentional, but I'm always introducing my students to concepts that they never considered before. And it's not always easy, right? Sometimes it causes a tension that I was like, oh, wow, I wasn't exactly prepared to kind of balance this, right? But I recognize that it's new. Like, for example, my political science class that I taught, we're not just going to talk about this is a Democrat and this is a Republican. We start the semester off with, we're going to unpack the documentary The 13th, and we're going to talk about politics. And if you're ever in a room and the conversation of politics comes up and no one mentions race, you should leave. You should leave that classroom because they're being intellectually dishonest.
Wow.
So we just start there and have very candid conversations and unpack it. And so many of my students have said, I've never in my life, thought about it this way or experienced that. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, like a new thought about what institutional racism looks like and how it manifests in our criminal justice system can be an uncomfortable thought, because some of my students have told me, you're the very first Black teacher I've ever had in my life. So it can be different, right? So it's for good or bad. It's certainly disrupting a flow of how they kind of anticipated the class going.
Yeah, and you said that sometimes it's uncomfortable. How do you deal with the discomfort when that happens?
So, funny story.
So we've talked about this.
Okay. I don't even know if this is a great thing, but Tom is my boss, right? But he also has this quality that makes people feel unguarded. And it's important because a lot of times as adjuncts, you don't necessarily feel free to fail, right? You feel like you have to be so perfect because you want to come back next semester, right? And if you don't feel like there's room for you to mess up, you don't try anything. And then you get rigid. And then if you are messing up, who do you go to, right? You go to other peers that you may not see because they're busy with their second jobs or whatever they need to do, right? So there's no room to be like, damn, I'm kind of like stumbling with this. So my brilliant self decided to go to my boss and be like, I know you just evaluated a class that I did really well in, but you missed the class I was like effing up in. So,
wow. Okay.
So I came to talk to him because I am really honest and really candid in what I write about and my beliefs. So it doesn't take much for you to Google me and just know where I stand on things politically, socially, or just whatever. So while we're teaching these very complicated subjects about institutional racism and politics, right, I have students whose beliefs completely are opposite of mine, like in every way that you can imagine. Like, I know this, they know this, and I do my absolute best. Like, I know that I would not, like, quote unquote, hold this against them. Like, I'm just as available for any student. I'll do the same thing for all my students. I'll bend over backwards. But my students who have very different political views from me were super quiet in this class. No, I mean, they would not speak. I mean, we would have amazing discussions, and they just, like, would not say anything. And but I was like, maybe they just aren't very confident. Maybe they don't know. But then I would give essay assignments because all my classes are writing intensive. I didn't even know that wasn't required. I'm just like, that's crazy. You got to learn how to write. So I would assign them these essays, and it would be brilliant. And I'm like, oh my gosh, why didn't you say this? And I would like give these speeches like how iron sharpens iron. Like, I don't understand. You just taught me a lot about like gun reform from your perspective, and you just gave me a lot and I just learned so much.
That's great.
I'm learning from your essay. I want your students to learn from you. Like, I would do so much to try to get them to open up. Nothing. I would reach out to them via email. Nothing. So finally I told Tom, I said, it's me. Like, it's me. It's me. It has to be like, I was like, that's not, I said, I want to know like what I'm doing because that's not fair to them. Like, I don't care what you believe politically. You pay the same tuition as your neighbor, as everybody in class. You should feel free to express your views. And I was like, there's something going on where it's me, where they're not feeling that way. And that's not fair to them. And then I want to hear from them because and I said this, I was like, this is probably going to be the only space in this political climate where we are going to respectfully engage and disagree, but learn from each other and understand it from different views. Let's take advantage of that. And I was like, I'll keep trying.
Yeah.
I was like, they say nada. They are brilliant in their papers. They communicate with this. I said, it's me. It absolutely. I try everything. It's me, and I don't know what to do about it because the semester's still going.
Yeah.
So Tom and I was just like, so we were just kind of like unpacking things where, we can kind of like mitigate that. And he was like, have you working some 101s as part of your class? Like, gave me really great feedback on how to kind of like make it better.
Can I put a sidebar in this right here, and then we'll jump back in just because. So first of all, I cringe every time you call me your boss. As I refer to you, I do think of you as a colleague first. We teach together, and I think it defines our conversations. And so but the reason I value you so much is you talked, and thank you for saying that you feel like you have the freedom to fail. But one of the things that makes you such a valued instructor and someone I come to for my own feedback about what we could be doing better is that you are so open about when you feel like you're not doing as much as you can be, or you're worried about how, something has come off in the classroom. And too often I think we try to sweep that under the rug, where we model our teaching lives some ways the way we do our social media platforms, which is that we try to project all the good things and show people why we're good teachers. And I think one of the reasons I know you're such a great teacher, not just because I've observed you in the classroom and I've seen you run these incredibly dynamic, engaging classes with your students, but because you're really honest about those moments when we're not perfect teachers and you're constantly trying to work that problem to get that student to emerge more and engage more in a classroom conversation. So thank you. And now I want part 2 of the story because I know that it wasn't your fault because I got the aha email the other day.
It was an aha moment, but Tom kept saying, well, why do you think it's you? I was like, I'm not going in there and saying, this is who you should have voted for. I said, but it was around the time where I just wrote this piece and it went like really viral for the New York Times. And it was called like Raising a Brown Girl in a Red State. Yeah. So I had really candid conversations about what it is for our children to live in these times and what my daughter's experiencing. And I don't bring up like, oh, I write for this publication because I think that's a bit, whatever. But sometimes a student will. Right. And then once one student finds it and then they find Google and then they just know it. So I just, wrote this really public article, which, some people loved, some people did not. Yeah. My gosh, the comment section.
I'm sure. I thought it was fantastic.
Thank you. So I was like, no, it's me. So I just knew for sure it was me. But I really did try my best, the best as I could that semester. And nothing changed. Mm-hmm. Right? But I had some really strong, dominant students who just, their views were kind of in line with mine. Uh-huh. So fast forward to this semester, because I'm like a super nerd, I was like thinking about this while I was on a bad date. While this guy was talking about something ridiculous.
That's a good use of your time, actually.
Oh my gosh, I had to get through this dinner. Yeah. I was like, he's not that bright. I'm not talking about this movie with him.
That's some serious multitasking.
Right. So I was just like, you know what it is? So I have this one of my classes now, and my really super dominant students, that they're brilliant, they are really charismatic, they are confident, and they are smart. I have to be very, very careful because they will dominate the class, and they are super, super, super conservative. So then now my far more liberal students are super quiet. Okay. Like, will not say a word around these topics. They're not, the ones that dominate the class, they're not, like, disrespectful. Like, they're presenting their views, like, really brilliant. Like, I was like, we don't have opinions here. Like, you substantiate this with facts, and we talk from there. Mm-hmm. And they do it well. And I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. This is, like, going to rate, fantastic discussion. And then I was like, wait a minute. It's not me. I was like, it wasn't me. So then I was, like, super amped, and I was, like, on the phone with Tom. I was like, yo, guess what? Guess who it wasn't? So it wasn't me. What I realized was that the students, if there are multiple students, all it takes is 3 or 4, and they are confident and they are outspoken and they're really smart, that really intimidates other students to the point where they're going to be quiet, regardless of, so if it just so happens to be that if the dominant voices are super conservative, it will be a domino effect on the other teacher. So they were more setting the tone than I was.
The behavior, not the content, was setting the tone.
It was the behaviors, not the contents, that was setting the tone. So I was like, oh, okay, so now you just have to manage this the way you would any other strong, dominant student. Right? So I was like, oh my gosh.
Well, that's so interesting because I think, I have the same experience when I go into the classroom. I'm like, today, I was just talking to a colleague yesterday because we were talking about prejudice and the explanations for prejudice and discrimination. And it's always kind of like, I'm not quite I'm not as table shaky as you are in the sense that I love to apply what we're talking about to real life stuff, but when it gets hard or controversial, I kind of walk in a little tensed up, but it's a really good point that you're making, that it's not necessarily about a disagreement in class. It's about the personality styles of the students in the class. And you can actually end up with a really good conversation about something that's difficult as long as, like you say, you can manage the conversation.
Yeah, set rules.
So the word manage, is that so? When you have these strong, occasionally dominating voices in the classroom, how do you manage them? And is manage the right word?
Well, because I know where these conversations can go, because I see where they go with adults, right? I set like rules in a classroom, like, okay, like we're not just going to spit out opinions. Like, we want to make a statement, you have to substantiate it with facts and not from Uncle Joe's YouTube channel that you kind of saw, right? So if you say something like, one of my students was like, the president is just trying to be helpful and keep the racists out, the Mexican racist. Let's talk about that. Like, let's really unpack that. And we're going to get to, and so I also have a whole, in my political science class, I'm big on like critical thinking exercise. So we have a, let's identify what's fake news or real news, right?
Great.
So that's a whole lesson where we all collectively set the criteria, right? So we agreed upon, like, this is the criteria. And then all of the students kind of bring clips. And even like one of my more super conservative students, he brought in like a clip from CNN. And it was because one of the things that I was teaching them we all agreed on the criteria, but when fear is used to push something, like that's a red flag, pay close attention, right? So he brought in this clip from CNN, and it was around a time about one of the school shootings. It seems like there's so many. Yeah. And then the commentator was saying, you know, we have to ban these, and he named some gun. I don't know a lot about guns, right? So he said, we have to ban these guns, and he had the image of this, it looked like a machine gun that you would just use at war, right? He's like, we have to ban these, so these are dangerous. So the student, he was like, you know, I'm not going to state you guys already know my opinions, but I just want to point out what's false in it. She was like, this gun is called a such and such, right? This is what's used in, you know, war for soldiers. This is not the gun that the shooters would use. This is the gun that the shooter would use, but this one evokes more of a reaction, right? So it was just like the most brilliant way, like, of like unpacking critical thinking stuff based on facts. And it, like, so everyone in my classroom, regardless of, you know, your political views, I was like, so are we going to agree that right now CNN is showing fake news? They was like, I mean, not fake news, but like that it's inflammatory, that's propaganda, like, are we going to recognize it? So it was like, yeah. So it was like really great. So going back to Tom's question in terms of how do we quote unquote manage it, there are set rules. Like you can't just, you have to substantiate it with facts. You can't just fly off what I think, right? So if you can't substantiate it with facts from spaces and places that we've already agreed in the beginning of the semester were valid sources, then we push you further on that collectively.
That sounds really wise, because again, you can make this space feel safe for the students because they know that there are those boundaries. That's something that came up in our last interview with Sharon.
I told students I don't think, and I've talked to students about this, it's never gotten to the point where it's like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. But only one time I've had to collectively jump in and like, I'm going to electoral college this and give me a popular vote, and I'm going to stop this whole conversation. Because I was like, this is going to get, because we were told, it was a political science class again, and we were talking about like the Kavanaugh hearing. Oh. Yeah. Just sidebar, these kids make me feel so old because I will just bring up things as if they already know. So, because one student was like, I don't understand, why are they bringing it up? So I had to explain to them the vetting process, and I was like comparing it to
Anita Hill.
Yeah. And they were like blank stares. I said, oh my gosh.
I know.
But, so it was during that conversation, it just led to a conversation about rape. In my sociology class, if we were going to have a conversation about consent, I would lay some really clear ground rules. I don't just allow the conversation of rape to just gradually come up because there's no ground rules laid. There's nothing. So then as I was about to interject, this kid, like the student said something, and I was just like, oh my gosh. So I had to like immediately jump in, stop the discussion. That was the first and only time that I'll do it.
Yeah, because the subject came out before you were expecting,
and I had to explain it.
But this is really, that's good practice in terms of these kind of hot moments that arise in a classroom where things are becoming more personal and emotionally charged. And so the question is, as an instructor, is, hey, how do I get above this? Yeah. And so I think that's one of those, sometimes we have, sometimes you do need to hit that pause button. And there's a couple ways, I think you can do it. You can ask them, okay, this is getting pretty heated. Do you guys mind writing about this for 5 or 10 minutes? You know what I mean? Let's see what we write, and we'll share some of those thoughts in a calmer manner. Or if you really feel like things are spiraling, you realize, guys, this is a really important topic, but it's either off topic, right? It's getting us away from what we really need to be talking about, or I think it's worth reflecting on. We're going to come in and I'm going to bring in a lesson next class that's going to help address this in a way that I think we can get our ideas out, but not in a way that's pointing fingers at each other. So,
we had this workshop. We did this thing at because Tom and I kind of talk a lot about, oh my gosh, this didn't go so great, right? And then he would give me feedback.
When you say it like that, it just emphasizes how much wrong stuff we do in the classroom. But we do. It's true. I mean,
so I don't know. I'm just not going to go say, hey, this was wonderful today. But I'll just go in. I'm like, oh, my gosh, this was really hard. So because that was so helpful, and I told Tom, I said, I wish we had this space. I was like, because, to kind of have these discussions and workshops. So we ended up having, I don't even know what we called it, like a coffee something where professors came in and you were able to share a struggle or a strength, and we kind of like exchanged ideas. And it was And that conversation with Tom kind of birthed that candid conversation with other professors, and Tom was in the room. And that was an idea that I gleaned from that. When we have those hot moments, like I wasn't thinking about that. Like it just popped off, and I was just like, I gotta stop.
Yeah.
But I actually got that idea for another time to stop and say, you know what? I didn't prep you guys. I didn't prepare us. I don't want anyone to be harmed by our language, but let's write because I want to hear from you.
Yeah.
That's something that I'm going to adopt later.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea. So, and that's really kind of the point of this podcast too, is we're hoping to be able to share our own experiences and our own ideas, and that people can, find something useful from what we're talking about. I want to segue a little bit into, because I want to be in one of your classes because I want to be part of one of these conversations. And I'm wondering if for you as a student, did you feel like you had classes that were like the classes you teach, or were there experiences that were the opposite of that? What kinds of things happened as a student for you that inform your teaching?
So this is interesting. I'm from Yonkers, New York, and our school system was really horrible. And all through school, most of my teachers I would get this so often, I didn't even realize I should be offended, would either imply that I cheated on a writing exam, or, just come out directly say, like, it was always that when I turned in something, they would be like, did your mother write this? Like, it was always some type of implication that I cheated. And it just never registered to me that, I should tell my mom that this is offensive. It didn't register to me like these very white teachers was just, this black girl had to have cheated, right?
Yeah.
So that was just the norm from my experience. So, and then I went away to college, and I went to an HBCU, a historically black college and university. And one of my professors... So I'm proud of you, Tom. So one of my professors, of course, we had some type of writings. I wrote an essay, and she said, "You are a brilliant writer." And that was the first time in my life I had ever heard that. Like, I've been accused of cheating, or, they just like, your mom wrote this for you, right? It was always something. It just never dawned on. Like, no one has ever said, wow, you're a gifted writer. Like, so no one ever poured into that talent or even helped me make the connections to it.
Right.
Until I got into college, and my professor was like, you're a really brilliant writer. Like, you could do this. And for the first time, just kind of like sparked that in me. Yeah. And that clearly has, that confidence it changed me. So they gave me the confidence to, by the time I went to graduate school at some super white school in Ohio that just paid me to be there.
Bowling Green.
Bowling Green. One of my professors, the first assignment for the class, it was some type of huge paper. So I turned it in. He said, I'm the only black person in the program. I turned it in. He was like, your paper was surprisingly good.
Surprisingly good.
It's the sound of my forehead slapping my hand.
Yeah. So by that, fortunately, I had 4 years of nurturing professors that really built my confidence, helped me to understand it and make that connection. I didn't have the confidence to check that professor. Yeah. Right? That didn't come to like the second semester. Then I had to be like, damn, I got to check the students and the professor in this class.
Yeah.
But that was very mindful. That really showed me the power of our words as educators. So that informs my teaching, because I'm so intentional about when I recognize a gift in a student, I highlight it. I never take for granted that maybe they've been hearing this their whole time. Like, even the students that are like, passionate and loud, I'm like, you're really good at this. You have a lot of confidence. Have you ever considered this? My students that are great writers, I tell them these things all the time. The moment I see like potential for something great, I'm always pushing my students for the honors program where it's applicable. Yeah. Like, I look for it now. I'm deliberate, and I purposely like to teach college success classes sometimes. Okay. Well, I like to get a break from politics and stuff, but B, it's a great time to like impart those things into students as they start in college.
Absolutely.
Because I know what it is to like, I don't think professors realize that it's very possible that you went your whole academic career with not a single teacher saying you're smart.
Yeah. And you make such a good point too, because the feedback that you give, it can make such a difference in the way you give the feedback. Because in a weird, disturbing way, accusing you of cheating was actually recognizing the quality of your work.
And this writing is surprisingly good.
Yeah, exactly. So it's recognizing the quality, but that's not what lands on you.
Of course.
And then the flip side is you can be someone who has been under the radar. You know, and I think of students who are in not great school districts, right, where so much attention is being focused on the students who are struggling, that the students who are doing well are kind of ignored, right? Yes. Because it's like, phew, I don't have to do anything with this student. And I feel like sometimes we do get those students who come here and have been doing the work and have been doing well, and no one has ever actually said,
told them,
you're really good. Yeah, you're actually really good. And because you think, oh, they must have heard it before, but a lot of our students won't have heard that before. The other thing I wanted to say, I wanted to actually tie it into one of the articles that you wrote for The Root. This was your 4.0 GPA won't protect you from systemic racism. And I just thought you made such a powerful point, so I'm just going to read it. It's you said, Black students in general are 3 times more likely to be suspended or expelled than white students. This is especially problematic considering that disciplinary problems at school can lead to a student's first contact with the juvenile justice system, which contributes to the school-to-prison pipeline. And I just thought that was so powerful. And I was also thinking of it when you were talking about the students who are really confident and speaking out in class. Who gets to get away with speaking out and being really confident and speaking their mind in class?
It's not us.
Yeah, oftentimes
No,
It's not really
gender
students
and
that
race.
look like me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They're not women. They're not women of color.
Right.
It's totally not.
Right.
Because we're called loud or
Right.
brass.
Exactly.
So when there are students who are, I always encourage students to kind of speak their mind, but I'm very careful, make sure I'm mindful to also encourage students of color because they've probably never been encouraged when they're loud.
Right.
They've probably been kind of shifted or shaped to kind of just be quiet.
Right.
Just be happy to be at the table. Just be
Right.
happy to be here, right?
Right.
Because that is something that's kind of indoctrinated in a lot of students of color.
Yeah.
I
Yeah, so
encourage
it's
professors to look at the body language of their students, how men are positioning their bodies within the classroom. I know you can't see me now, audience out there, as I lean back and cross my legs versus how women will traditionally, follow these gender norms and expectations. Or, as a white male, that it is a privilege, my ability to just tell my students to call me Tom and expect that there will still be some power dynamic at play in the classroom that is not always the case for our professors of color, our female professors in the classroom.
That's a great point, Tom, because I personally ask that my students refer to me as Professor Turner or Dr.
Yes.
Turner.
Yep.
Because of that, because there's an extra layer of authority and privilege that male professors bring into the classroom. And the study, I want to bring facts because I'm talking to Shanita.
It's that surprising that the professors that sticks in the craw of your throat.
Right. And the studies do show that female professors and professors of color are rated lower on the student evaluations and things like that. So the other thing that made me think about in terms of body language is there is kind of a flip side because and again, maybe this is because I'm a woman and a woman of color, that I do tend to get, and one of the things I love about being here is we have all these non-traditional students. And so the psychology, it tends to be a lot of non-traditional aged women in the class who will start to dominate the conversation. And then I see my young men with their hoodies pulled around their face, slumped down in the desk, and I recognize, okay, I need to pull them in somehow. I need to bring their voices in. So you're constantly balancing in what setting does what person feel like they have a voice.
Do you have a practice for capturing some of those voices, Gina? Because, I think we've all had the hoodie lineup either in the back or to the side of the room if it's shaped like,
Yeah. I have these two, I adore them, these two students. And they actually sit in the front row, but they can get a little bored. They're the two young male African-American students. And I forced myself when I got here, and was teaching 5 classes. And that first semester, I could not learn anybody's name. And so I stole a technique from a colleague of mine. And so now at the beginning of every class, I give them an index card and we do a quiz at the beginning of the class, 1 question. And I have to hand them their card and then collect their card. And that forces me to learn everybody's name. So I say all of that to say that, so if I can call on them by name and also remember things they've said in the past. So just this week, we were talking about the Stanford prison experiment in class, always fun, and also all the controversy around Zimbardo and the findings of et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, and I was able to remember this conversation that my 2 guys, and they're, I'm not super worried about them as students or anything, but they just were being very quiet in class. And I was able to say, so for example, if you were in one room and you were in the other room and you were shocking him, and I could use their names and, kind of made them laugh and it made the class laugh and brought them back in. And then they sort of started contributing to the conversation again. Just seeing them as individual human beings, I think is a key to so much of this. So, yeah, I don't know. Do you have other strategies?
As human beings and as adults in the classroom, or emerging
and as adults. Yeah, that's a good point, too. Yeah.
Like in the beginning of the semester, like you know how you do the whole icebreakers. So I always tell my students, like, tell me your name, tell me one thing about you I should really know, and then tell me who your like favorite rapper and or singer is. And then of course they have horrible taste in music, so, but I might not remember their names, but I'll remember their favorite rapper. I'd be like, oh, you like Drake, you're gonna be hella emotional the whole semester.
Oh, that's great.
I always find ways to like kind of clown those students or personalize it, or just, you know, there are great ways to lighten up the moment and you know, connect me to, okay, it's a memory trick as well.
Yeah, that's great. And I in class this week also, before class, a little group of students were talking about music, and it was as though they were sort of like, have you heard of this person? Have you heard of that person? And kind of teasing the one for not knowing a lot of music. And then one of them said, well, you know, and I love Chance the Rapper, and he's got a new album. And I went, and then they looked at me like, you know who that is?
It's always a lovely moment when you get the one reference in the conversation.
Exactly. I wouldn't have known who anybody else they were talking about was. But
Shanita, I want to reflect back on something you said. First, just to register another type of student, because you shared the story about the student who couldn't believe the work was your own. And there's a mirror image student I know who I had in one of my own classes who shared a story who, you know, she'd come from an inner city school.
You mean the teacher couldn't believe when the work was my own?
Yes, the teacher couldn't believe the work was your own when they said, you know, or they're surprised that the work is good, right? The same, two verses, the same thing. In the case of my student, it was this incredibly heightened imposter syndrome because she had been a good kid in an inner city school where gangs were rampant, and she felt like she had been given A's based on the fact that she wasn't in trouble and not on the quality of her work. And so I'll use that as a means to segue into the fact that I know through our conversations and just through your general demeanor, your investment in your students' success, how much you want to promote their individual growth and successes within your own classroom. And you shared an assignment with me and Gina. And in introducing the assignment, you talked about the thought process behind it and how you frame it in terms of offering the students an opportunity not to take the finals. I'll let you describe that a bit, but I thought it was just a wonderful example of one way that you promote individual student engagement and success within your classroom through an assessment of their work.
Okay, so sure. So this is my favorite assignment to give each semester. I got it really wrong when I first started with the class. So it's a huge project, right? It's 7 to 10 page research paper on a topic that you can select, right? And of course, it has to be consistent with our syllabus and a class discussion. But there's different steps to it. Well, one, the thinking is, I remember when I was in graduate school, and you got to we all remember, like you get to either take comprehensive exams or, you know, do your thesis, right? So I chose the comprehensive exams, and I was able to choose my own topic based on my own interests. So I chose disproportionate minority confinement. So I became like a really great expert in that. I don't remember a lot of stuff about, other than my racist teachers and a lot of other stuff, I don't remember much about graduate school, but I know disproportionate minority confinement like the back of my hand, because that was my topic that I chose, that I worked with for the entire time. So granted, obviously, this is not graduate school, so I allow my students to choose their own topic that they're super passionate about, and I work with them throughout the whole semester. So you have to pick your topic and your thesis. I was really shocked at how many students didn't understand what a thesis was. You have to pick your topic and your thesis, and you have to get it approved. And then, like, the next step is you have to write a very detailed outline, and each point has to support your thesis, and then that has to be approved.
Yeah.
And then, like, so each part of the project has to be approved, and then the final piece is this big 7 to 10 page research paper combined with, and you have to present it to the class for 10 minutes using a film or documentary, right? So I had one of my students who his subject was something about how police corruption is embedded in a culture of policing, right?
Okay.
So I forgot what his exact thesis was. Maybe that was it, right? But it was fantastic. So he showed the film Training Day with Denzel Washington, how the cops come in really excited and I want to be a great cop, and then you have these bad cops. The culture is there, and he talked about the pressure to comply and kind of like brought in strain theory a bit. So you have to be able to right, really, but because we work on this the entire semester, like I work with them individually. I dedicate 2 classes where it's a project day where you bring all your stuff in, and I'm floating and I'm working with each student independently on your process of it, right? Yeah. So it's a lot. It's a huge part of your grade, and it's a lot of work. So by the time the project, the end of the semester comes, and you're presenting it, and it's brilliant and it's fantastic. But this is the trick. The gag is that could have really been my final exam, because there's so much work, right? And we're required to do a culminating exam. But I still offer a final exam. But I tell my students, for those who get a 95 in my class or up, you get to exempt the final exam. So when everyone is studying and cramming and stressed out, this is one less class you have to study for. And, but you can't like use bonus points to get it. Like during this time, if you have a 95 and up, you exempt the final and you don't have to come for the prep day. So they are super excited. So
it's a big carrot.
It's a huge carrot because they're still taking a final. Technically, I'm just offering 2 final exams.
Right, exactly.
Don't tell them.
And the work that's going into the project is more work than it would
more
take
work.
to cram
Exactly.
for
So they get super excited and they work really hard. Yeah. Maybe every semester I may have like a couple of students that exempt, but always I have a lot of students that get like a 90 above.
Yeah.
And I have like the students they perform better, they work harder, and they get like really excited to get that little carrot. I was like, so nobody knows. All I'm doing is offering 2 final exams, but okay. But
the
it
beauty
works.
is because you've given them this you've given them this choice, and then you've given them this intrinsic motivation, right? Because it's like, I chose to do this, and I get to pick whatever I'm interested in.
Yep.
So right there, that's going to be a lot
even though
more
you have
motivating.
to get approved for it,
right.
you still you feel this type of freedom and control. And I told them, I was like, you're all incredibly smart, and I'm going to teach you like that.
Yeah.
I was like, you're going to think critically, and you're going to be challenged, and if it's the first time, that's okay.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That I love that idea, and I'm totally going to steal that idea of making the final optional.
Give 2.
If you
get right.
Yeah, exactly. the final exam test optional if the project is good, because I do a lot. As I've been here longer and longer, I'm like you. I've gotten far more project based, and they are so much more engaged, and I agree with you. I think it makes the material that much more memorable.
I want to highlight, and I'm sure this is the case in your own assignments, Gina, as well, that when you have these large scale projects, even in the way you explained it to us, it was in terms of process, and it broke it down into these digestible chunks. So the students knew like they could tackle each thing in its turn, get feedback on it, and by the end of them had produced this kind of huge, amazing thing that I'm sure then you provide some substantive feedback to the student, that's kind of the reward at the end of this, that you acknowledge all the good hard work they put into it, and then areas to think about, hey, if you follow this idea up in your next class, you should check this out.
I tell them that, right? And I was like, I'm not going to. I was like, if you were complying with the schedule, I was like, I'm not going to steer you in the wrong way. It's going to be fantastic. And at the end, when you're presenting, part of the grade is because you have to do what I call like demonstrating understanding of your subject. Yeah. So after you present, you have to be able to fully answer my questions.
Yes.
Not the students, because they're terrible to each other.
Yeah,
they'll ask the
exactly.
most complicated, hard, tough questions, and that's just not fair.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you feel free to tell them to shut up. Right? You don't have to answer their questions. Because I was like, they ask questions that are harder than I would think to ask. Like, you really want them to know the answer to institutional racism? You want them to know that answer.
To solve that?
To solve it. In 5 seconds. So they're super hard on each other. But you have to be able to answer my questions.
Foucault. I think that is a perfect moment to to sum up, but we're not going to let you go that quickly. Thank you, first of all. This has been a pleasure, as I knew it would be, and just for gracing us with your experiences, all the thought you brought to bear on our questions today, and for helping everyone who's listening and just giving them some great takeaways, things to have in their back pocket to think about when they're putting their projects together. I love your descriptions of you floating around that class. I see it, and I see all those moments with individual students, but you're not off the hook quite that easy. Before you go, we want to know like one guilty pleasure you have that your colleagues at NCC do not know about you. And that's probably tough for someone. And I know you live a lot of your life on social media, so you got to dig deep for this one, Shanita.
I know, but that's still a little. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Okay, I'm going to tell you guys this story.
Yay. Okay.
So there is this black gossip website, whereas usually they kind of talk about just black celebrities or whatever. So I don't even know why I did this. So I put my name in that search engine on that website. For the love of God, I must have hated myself that day. I was just like, oh my gosh. So I will occasionally throw my name in on those websites or whatever. There was some awful things. They were just like, what the hell is she? One of them said, why does this professor have all this damn time? What is she talking about? In reference to one of my articles, and I was just like, oh my gosh. And then I'm I wrote another article about like something about the ride or die mentality is killing Black women. It was very specific to hip hop.
Yes,
and it was very specific to hip hop. And I was like unpacking it, and then somebody in that little gossip website was just like, "She's old as hell, and she doesn't even know contemporary hip hop." I was like, "I hate you people. Oh. You're the Russians." I was like, "Oh my god,
it's the bots.
It's the bots." Right? So
we always knew the bots were trolls,
right? So I did that one time, and I was like, "I can't believe I did that." But it was funny, but I'll just never do that again. I'll tell anybody.
Oh, that's terrifying. I won't even go and look at
I don't even read my comments.
Yeah.
I don't read my comment sections in my articles.
I might see the guilty. Crazy. I'm not sure I see the pleasure in that.
Right?
Answer.
I was hoping for something good. I didn't know it was going to be that.
Well, and here's another thing. So we came up with the question, tell us your guilty pleasure, but then I remembered a conversation I had with friends about guilty pleasures in music, and I took a stand. I said, I have no guilt about the pleasure I take from music. If I want to listen to the Bee Gees, I don't feel guilty about that.
Only
I just
early
said it.
Bee
Yeah, I
Gees.
said it.
Only early Bee Gees.
I said, disco Bee Gees.
Gina.
Disco Bee Gees, baby.
Shame.
No, I feel no
judging
shame.
you as a human
no
now.
shame. No shame. Put it in the comments. So I want to take the guilt out of it. Is there something that you just love that maybe we don't know about you? Love to do.
I still love really, and I'm sorting this out. Like in my writing, like how do I navigate this? Because I still love super super hood rap music. Like once I go commercial, I don't even like you anymore. Like I'm in the gym listening to my music, selling drugs in my head. Like I still do. I still love ratchet rap.
You still love it? There. See, that is a
beautiful
answer.
I would blast it in my car, and then I'm like pulling up on campus, and my students and I'm like, I know, I'm sorry.
One day we'll pull up next to each other, and you'll have like this total gangster rap, and I'll be listening to Staying Alive. And we'll just wave at each other, and it'll be a moment.
I'm shaking my head. I know the audience can't see it, but there's a lot of
judging both of
us.
He's judging both of us. Well, thank you so much, Shanita. I'm so glad we got a chance to talk because we don't get to see each other nearly enough. So, and it's like you said, it's so great for colleagues just to be able to share both the insecurities and the successes in the classroom.
It's a pleasure and a release when it happens, I think. So thank you.
Thank you for creating a space for us to be able to have this and do this.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. You're welcome. Pedagogia go. We'll ask you what we want to know. Well, we just had a fantastic conversation with Shanita Hubbard about her experiences as a part-time faculty member, as a writer, how she brings those two things together in the classroom, and also how she sees herself as a table shaker, which that is my new favorite term.
It is mine too.
And Tom, I think that one thing that she really highlighted was the importance and the value of her relationship to you as her dean.
Yeah, I feel really privileged in my position, as a dean who also gets to teach. And I mostly, and I said, that I was uncomfortable when she referenced me as a boss because I try, I recognize that as a supervisor that I see my role as being able to offer the important feedback that we want in all of our roles. And I think I try to do so as a colleague, but mostly I learned from Shanita just as, so she's been teaching all of us through this conversation, those of you who are listening, and she's taught me so much and helped me reflect on my own teaching in the classroom, and also I think helps me be a better administrator and dean. Because she'll call me out, and I am 1,000 times grateful for being called out and people who help me see what the blinders sometimes block sometimes. And she can speak so well to the role of being part-time faculty at NCC or really anywhere, and its great strengths and the value that she takes from it, as well as it's not a perfect system, and it's a system that we still need to keep working on to make it better and to promote being better faculty.
Yeah, I think that's true. And she really reminded me, too, of the value of my relationship with my dean. And I feel very lucky that I have a good relationship with my dean, Christine Pence, and that I do feel like I can be honest with her if I feel like I'm struggling, because I think that was really powerful to hear that Shanita had the trust to go with you with something that she felt uncertain about. And I feel lucky that I have that relationship with my dean and that she's been able to give me feedback. And I think it also highlights the importance of the administration being in the classroom too, because you can really compare apples to apples. You're both on the ground in the classroom dealing with students. So I thought that was really powerful. That was a big piece that I took from that
It was, and like I always try to think like, what are my pocket takeaways? Meaning like those things that are in my pocket that I can pull out in the classroom. And Shanita, boy, I mean, she wades into heavy-duty conversations in her classrooms because of the subjects that she teaches, because of her fearlessness, because of her table shaking, and she comes into a room and she says, "Guys, this is college. It's time to get real. We're going to respectfully dig into things that other people see as hot button topics, as potentially controversial, as potentially polarizing, and finds ways to do it." And the way she spoke about different experiences in the classroom when it got too hot, knowing that some dominant student voices can take over a conversation and might drive it to the left or the right, or we don't need to be left or right. We can go up or down on a given issue.
Yeah.
And when you're aware of that in the classroom, that means that, and you talked again about your hoodied students, those quieter voices, and those little practices that we can have in our back pocket for calling on them by name, asking them to identify in a given situation, which I thought was a great idea, as means to draw them into the conversation and make safe spaces for those really great conversations to have.
Yeah, and as Shanita said, to create those guidelines ahead of time, to have the criteria. So I'm totally taking some of these practices that she described in our conversation. And
projects as process, as digestible chunks for students to tackle one at a time with substantive feedback, giving students things to strive for. And I think really importantly, I don't know that it was said explicitly, but I think it underwrote everything we were talking about, the importance of telling our students that they're valuable and doing a good job. When they do good work, tell them, because we don't know that someone has told them that previously. Because she had that shoulder tap moment when someone says, "This is awesome.
Yeah.
You're a great writer."
Yeah.
And we all need that, whatever role we're going to play or whatever career we're going to chase down.
Absolutely. And I think it just makes me think of one other thing, that when you praise a student for applying what they've learned to something that's important to them, think about how much more it means to you when you get praise for something you care about, as opposed to, I got an A on this multiple choice test. And I think that's just highlights another really important facet and valuable facet of project-based work. So it was really validating to hear her talk about her project-based work and make me think, I'm going to really value the project-based work in my own classes.
Hear, hear.
So great. Well,
I have to assign. It's so you handed me the first assignment. This assignment, I promise, will not. And boy, your assignment to me turned into an assignment for you, which is doubly unfair, especially given the text. I was like, "Oh, read this. It'll be great for the podcast."
But it was good. I'm glad I did it.
I'm so glad you did, and we're going to continue to dish about this when the microphone turns off. But I think mine is going to come from a really personal place. So here's your extra credit assignment. I know I've been calling it assignment, but like this is for extra credit. It's the above and beyond, right? That's what we want from our students.
Exactly.
So. Rather than like revisit like a past article or text that you've read, I had like some remarkable experiences. So a perk, and I'm going to call it a perk. It's not always the easiest part of my job, but my office is a place where students come in to share their stories. It might stem from an issue in a particular class. It might stem from something more systemic that's involved that is problematizing their position as a student at NCC. It might just come in because they know me, and they hopefully see me as someone that they can approach to talk to. And it's been a tough 2 weeks. Some really challenging stories from students have come into my office that have reframed for me some of the way I think about the way we support our students at NCC, which is that it seems to me time and again that we as academics, BS administration, faculty, are really jazzed to talk about offering academic supports and like, okay, we're going to get better tutoring services to the Learning Center. We're going to open up more lab hours for A and P. We're going to reinforce learning in these particular ways. But it seems to me that I lose more students due to personal issues, right? Things that are going on outside of the classroom than for a specific academic issue. And I think that, and so my thought process here is that our students' personal lives ultimately affects our pedagogy, and being thoughtful of the realities of their lives outside of the classroom. So I began this podcast by talking a little bit about seeing students as adults, right? And our students have adult problems, and so everything, struggles with mental illness, with depression, with raising a child single-handedly at home, economic reasons. I'm working a full-time job, a part-time job, and I'm a full-time student. I need help, right? And so and they need an adult to talk about those. So and they just need an ear, and then we can take, I think, that knowledge and we can be thoughtful about it within the classroom. And so my extra credit assignment for you is simply to, I know you have a fabulous relationship with your students. I want you to peg one. You probably have these conversations too, but pick one and talk to a student and hear their story. And then I want you to come tell that story to me and our audience and why it was valuable to you.
Yeah.
And I think how the practice of listening to stories and incorporating that into our teaching can be useful to all of our faculty listeners, all the people who teach.
Yeah, I think that it raises a really important point, again, that I think came up in our conversation with Shanita, which is to really be able to see each of your students as this whole person who contains multitudes. We quoted that on our last podcast. And I think we also need to be I look forward to talking about this more, because you mentioned how oftentimes these conversations start because there's been an issue, and so they come to your office. And I think that a line that we have to walk as professors too is to recognize where the line between professor and student versus counselor and counselee versus friends. I think Shanita mentioned, or this might have been when we weren't recording, but mentioned not allowing her students to follow her on social media. And Sharon also mentioned not becoming friends with her.
And for those of you listening, it's good practice.
Yes, definitely. Okay, that's another conversation, right? Because I actually do have I have colleagues who absolutely do engage with their students, their current students, on social media. So there are ways in which there are ways in which you can do it effectively. So when I think of engaging one-on-one with a student, I want to be mindful that I'm not prying, I'm not overstepping boundaries. So I want to think of in a bigger picture about how is it most appropriate for me to engage with these students and hear their stories. Yeah. So I love this assignment because it's really going to make me think as I go into the classroom every day next week, or however long it is until we record our next podcast.
I'm excited. And since you were so gracious and read the same thing that I did, I'll make sure that I'll be thoughtful as I'm listening to whatever stories come between now and then. Great. And I will continue to think about this, and it's going to be a great conversation when it happens.
I look forward to it.
Me too. So I just want to say thanks for an amazing conversation today. I want to say thank you, to our guest, Professor Shanita Hubbard. What a fabulous conversation, and I can't wait to see what episode 3 has in store for us.
Yes, absolutely. All right, well, take care.
You're here. You too, Gina. Hey, thanks for listening to Pedagogy A Go-Go, recorded in the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology at Northampton Community College in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Our podcast daydreamer/showrunner is Kelly Allen, and Pedagogy A Go-Go is produced by Jeff Armstrong. If you've got any questions, please send them to pedagogyagogo@gmail.com. Our social media handle is @pedagogyagogo, and you can stop by our website at www.pedagogyagogo.com for copies of podcast transcripts, guest assignments, and other useful tidbits. Keep in mind there are no hyphens or dots in any of the above web addresses. Until next time, this is Gina and Tom saying, take care and teach well.